Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. The next expansion of War Within pre-patch is hitting next week, with the expansion launching a month from now. And apparently all of a sudden Blizzard decided to drop one of the biggest holistic adjustments over in the War Within beta, which is going to shift the way that groups are going to play endgame content such as Mythic Plus dungeons. Part of this massive update is going to be a tweaking for every single tank spec in the game to give healers even more importance in group content, and that means tanks all have to be nerfed. And we've seen a bunch of adjustments with a bit of a broader brush this time around for a bunch of classes to Blood Death Knights, Guardian Druids, Prot Warriors, Protection Paladins, and every other tank. But also a lot of Death Knight specific changes this week, and a bunch of other class adjustments where while tanks are getting nerfed, other classes are seeing quite a lot of buffs. So for today, I want to do a bit of a deeper dive at one of those classes being the Death Knight, where they're finally fixing up one of the most fun hero towns for the Spec of Frost, or at least one of the more fun ones in my opinion, while also taking a closer look at all of these different Blood Death Knight changes, as well as the reactions that we've seen from the community. As always, if you guys enjoy this kind of regular War Within updates, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. Now, I really would love to just immediately talk about the Blood Death Knight changes from the get-go, because there's a lot to react to here after getting some time to actually play with it and try it out and get some feedback for it. But I do want to start off with some of the general changes first. We are seeing additional adjustments for survivability. A lot of classes are seeing this, so it's not a Death Knight specific thing. Like the Death Strike healing now has been adjusted. This one is going to affect Frost and Unholy a little, but this one affects mostly Blood DK though. Don't be surprised if you Frost or Unholy. Death Knight healing has been potentially bit different this time around next time you hop on the beta or on the PTR. The Enfeeble mechanic, which allows your ghoul to attack the target to reduce the damage done to you, that damage reduction effect has also been reduced a little, from a 15% down to a 12% damage reduction, which is a very slight adjustment. But also the talent of Null Magic, which allows your magic damage taken to be reduced by 8%. This one has been reduced from 10% to 8%, so Death Knights are a little bit squishier right now. Besides the basic changes, we got ourselves hero talent adjustments, and oh boy, these are very good. First of all, Deathbringer and Rider of the Apocalypse are seeing some adjustments this week. Rider has historically been the more popular out of the two, with Deathbringer trailing behind not really all that closely. Like, nobody was really playing Deathbringer up until this week all that much, unless you're a Blood Death Knight specifically, because they already had some pre-established synergies in that playstyle already. But Rider has been the dominant force for both Unholy and Frost, and they're trying to shuffle it out a little bit so they're a little bit closer to one another. This means Deathbringer is receiving some much needed buffs, and I've always loved this playstyle, the thematics, the playstyle for it, the burst element behind it, and they really are leading into it. The main ability to play with as a Deathbringer is Reaper's Mark. Essentially, you mark a target for death, and as you use Shadow or Frost abilities at that target, that Reaper's Mark builds up stacks, and after 12 seconds, or upon reaching 40 stacks, it explodes, dealing a set amount of damage per stack, which can result into like a 6 million proc chance potentially, which is super exciting. This one can also do AoE damage on top of it, so it's like a big haymaker setup ability that has a little bit more of like you kind of, in PvP combat, you'll kind of anticipate it. Once you see Reaper's Mark, you know something big is coming. But for PvE content, I think it's an excellent ability that has a few more synergies there. They've adjusted the cooldown of this ability to be 45 seconds instead of a minute, which for Frost Death Knights is huge. This allows you to synergize together with Pillar of Frost and your main burst windows. This allows you to have the most amount of impact in this playstyle every single time, so that is a huge benefit. There are ways to alter Deathbringer ability. Either you can give it a shorter cooldown down to 30 seconds, or you can have a stronger version of it where you get two Exterminate Scythe abilities. Basically, once it expires, your next Obliterate throws out two scythes, one single target, one AoE, so you get two of those kind of scythe combinations, so it makes the ability even beefier and even burstier. Then the rest of the entire Deathbringer toolkit now scales with your mastery. From the Reaper's Mark itself now scales with Frost Mastery, which is a sizable damage increase. Wave of Souls, whenever you apply a Reaper's Mark, you send a wave of Shadow Frost energy outwards and backwards, and it's at least guaranteed to crit on the way back, and when it crits, enemies do less damage to him. That also scales with Mastery, a small buff. Then there's the ability of Exterminate, which is that scythe mechanic I was talking about. After Reaper's Mark expires, the next Obliterate or Morrowind, if you're a Blood Death Knight, will send out two scythes, one for pure single target damage, the other to cleave enemies across, so it's like a single target and a cleave element, two scythes doing different things. And That damage also now scales with Frost Death Knight Mastery, which is so good. This allows Deathbringer to be a lot better and a lot stronger, and playing around with it, I like it a lot. Frost Death Knight did see a couple other nerfs this week as well, but the Deathbringer, I feel like for the most part, overshadows a lot of it, and it's so good to play with. The 45-second cooldown makes it synergize into the rest of your kit a little bit better. Its natural bursty elements do end up synergizing with that Pillar of Frost window so much more fluidly, and being able to land those abilities more regularly with Exterminates, as well as your Way of Souls, that AoE damage component. The fact that Deathbringer was kind of behind on AoE, specifically where Rider of the Apocalypse was dominant in that regard, now they're a lot closer together, with Deathbringer having a bit more of a bite to it for the spec of Frost Death Knight, which is quite awesome. I got to play around with this one a little bit, and overall it feels quite good. The payoff now feels great, because Deathbringer had theoretically a decent playstyle that synergized with Death Knight. It was just kind of desyncing in terms of its cooldowns, but now the cooldowns are synced up together, it works super well. It's not one that you really have to like commit or play into super heavily. You just gotta want to focus on the target that you mark with your Reaper ability. The Reaper ability, and after you use your Exterminate, there's a chance that Exterminate will reapply a free Reaper's Mark to a target, so you'll have to be a little bit more careful on which targets you want to put this on. But if, let's say, Reaper's Mark is on a target and the target dies early, it'll just travel to the next closest target to infect them with the Reaper's Mark, continue on those same stacks, so you never really lose out the value of this ability unless it has literally 0 targets to travel over to. But overall, it feels so much better. The payoff is so good, and Deathbringer finally feels like it could actually fit with the kit of a Frost Death Knight more fluidly, making it a much better hero talent in the process. Now, we did talk about the buffs for Deathbringer. Rider of the Apocalypse this week is seeing nerfs. Like I said earlier, Rider has been the dominant playstyle for both Unholy as well as Frost Death Knight, and Deathbringer just couldn't compete whatsoever. Everybody in the Mother is playing Rider of the Apocalypse. It has such an advantage over the other two in terms of both the playstyle as well as the utility, the conveniences, and the damage that it puts out. So that's when we're seeing a bit of a nerf, with the Riders themselves being nerfed by 15%. All of their base damage is being reduced, which isn't a huge portion of your damage, but a sizable amount, so this is going to be noticeable. Hungering Thirst Disease damage buff, as well as the Death Coil and Frost Death Knight damage buff, is also getting reduced from a 50% down to a 10%. Feast of Souls talent, which is this one right here, while you have 2 or more horsemen out, your runic power spending abilities deal more damage. That one is reduced from 30% down to 10%. Trollbane's Icy AoE ability, where Trollbane, when he comes out, one of the riders, he'll plant a Trollbane's Chain of Ice on a target. Attacking the target affected by Trollbane's Chain of Ice causes them to radiate damage to all nearby enemies. That damage has been reduced by 10%, not the biggest nerf. Whitemane is another one of the riders. When she comes out, she infects an enemy with Undeath. Striking the enemy with Obliterate or Scourge Strike causes that Undeath to gain additional stacks. You can't refresh the debuff, only Whitemane can, but you can still ramp up those stacks, making it quite a competitive damage ability in the process, and that one has also been nerfed by 10%. Not the craziest changes, but I kind of was expecting for Rider of the Apocalypse to take a hit here and there. Just everybody was playing Rider, nobody was touching Deathbringer, so it kind of makes sense for them to go in that direction. While we're on the topic of Frost Death Knight, since we're here, I'll just get through Frost and Unholy very quickly. Some of the newer talents for Frost Death Knights have been adjusted this week. These are significant nerfs, but playing around with them, it doesn't feel all that bad. You see, the newest playstyle that every Death Knight has been playing recently has become the dual-wield Death Knight, which I'm definitely not wearing as of this moment, but the dual-wield Death Knight build, high haste, high amounts of critical strike, has become a more popular choice over on the beta. Everybody ends up playing into a playstyle that's a bit of a hybrid of the two-handed Obliteration and the dual-wielded Breath of Zaragoza. You see, you don't necessarily have to play into Breath of Zaragoza, especially if you want to do AoE damage, because of the talent of Shattering Frost. Your Frost Strike can consume Razor Ice stacks, and when it does, a portion of the damage gets cleaved to nearby enemy targets. Then we have the talent right here with Arctic Assault, where Consuming Killer Machine fires off a Glacial Advance through your target. And Glacial Advance does quite a bit of damage, so you get freebie AoE damage this way. You get freebie cleave damage AoE from this one as well. And then you have Icy Death Torrent, which works off of your auto attacks. Auto-attack critical strikes have a chance to send out a Sleet of Ice, dealing frost damage to enemies in front of you. They've recently tuned a lot of those abilities, so they're a little bit stronger. So you have this like dual-wieldy, but not like a Breath of Zaragoza playstyle, closer to like a mix of Frost Strikey, Obliteration, kind of like a two-handed build, but dual-wielding, so you're utilizing those runic power spenders like Frost Strike a lot more aggressively tabbing from enemy to enemy to get more procs of Shattered Frost, firing off as many Arctic Assaults as you can outside of your obliteration window, and it's a lot more of an aggressive in-the-moment type of spec that isn't as much heavily reliant on cooldowns like a Breathless Zaragoza dual-wielding build is, but it's not quite as cooldown burst heavy as obliteration, where you have the most amount of burst as a two-handed obliteration build inside of your Pillar of Frost window, and then your damage outside of it is kind of like mediocre. This one kind of takes the best of both worlds, the sustainability of that dual wield build, but also the burst of that two-handed puts them together. That playstyle in particular is what's really getting nerfed as of this week, with things like Glacial Advance being nerfed by 15%, which directly affects Arctic Assault if anything. Icy Death Torrent also nerfed by 15%. Enduring Strength bonus has also been reduced from 20% strength down to 15% strength, as well as the Shattering Blade bonus. The actual Shattering Blade buff ahead of it has been reduced from 125% bonus to Frost Strike to 115, so a slight reduction there as well. But when it comes to actually playing it out, it seems like it's still a very, very powerful option. It's just, it ended up being the only good option that Death Knight started to play, this dual-wielded amalgamation build. And what I think what they're doing with this set of changes is they're trying to allow Death Knights to go back to a Breathless Zaragoza by making this like the only build that everybody plays, a little bit weaker, so Breath now looks a little bit stronger, or two-handed obliteration burst build looks a little bit better. And I think it's good that they have like 3 different playstyles that Frost Death Knights can utilize right now over on the beta. And ideally, I would like all of those playstyles to be as close to each other in terms of performance, so then it really comes down more to the player choice of how you want to play your Death Knight. Similar things we've seen with the Spec of Unholy. Essentially, they've taken all of the strongest talents that help create the common Unholy Death Knight build and are essentially going after every one of those talents that have been the dominant talents when it comes to overall builds that Unholy Death Knights can utilize. With talents such as Ebon Fever, where they're reducing that damage over time benefits of it and duration of it from a 50% increase down to a 12% increase. With Bursting Swords, the damage increase of Festering Wounds is reduced from 20% to 16%, with the actual damage of Bursting Swords talent reduced by 8% as well. And Super Strain, which has been the capstone that just about every Death Knight has been really heavily leaning into with the playstyle of Plaguebringer, which has been kind of like the must-have combo, and things like Commander of the Dead, Unholy Aura, and even like Decomposition taking a bit of a backseat. Super Strain, the diseases that are applied with the Blood Plague and Frost Fever, those are now applied at 75% effectiveness instead of 80%. So not a crazy amount of nerfs for Unholy Death Knight. It doesn't seem like anybody's really no longer taking Unholy Death Knights to dungeons at the very least. It seems that they're still going to be a very, very popular pick, at least in the current state. This just seems one of those like smaller adjustments to hopefully give them a little bit more opportunity to explore other builds and other play styles more than anything. Now, let's finally talk about this Blood Death Knight change, and this is primarily a nerf to all tanks going forward. It's a lot to get into, but essentially what they're trying to do for the next expansion is they realize that, at least in their words, that tanks are a little bit too self-sustainable, especially in dungeons, but also in raids. Like, for the most part, healers do not have to worry about tanks, which for a tank player, that's kind of a good feeling. This is where you are able to utilize your skill to survive through some of the harshest environments, and your role as a tank is to literally live. So they are going to be adjusting that survivability for every single tank in the game. And the way they put it in the blue post is not ideal. I don't think that's what they meant, but it came off kind of not great. In their words, the way that they put it together in the blue post is they wanted for healers to have a more notable role in group content. And as of right now, healers don't really feel like they are able to contribute a ton. There have been situations where classes have been able to create a certain composition where a healer wasn't technically required, where the tank was able to survive, the rest of the DPS were able to survive, and maybe you had an AUG evoker to help supplement a lot of that extra group value. And what essentially they want is for healers to have a more important and a more involved role in things such as Mythic Plus dungeons. But that means that tank survivability will probably have to go off to the side a bit in order to give healers something more to do. And healers essentially are going to have to be more involved in the tank survivability and tank healing process in dungeons. Now, that isn't controversial on its own, but the design of some of these changes that we've had over expansions upon expansions now, like such as Blood Death Knight, it kind of ends up being a little bit antithetical to the actual design of that tank. So for certain playstyles, such as let's say Bear Druid or even Protection Warrior, for instance, There's always been a bit of that healer-tank synergy. Tank is there to help reduce the damage as much as possible, but the healer is still required, and it still is a team sport in keeping the tank alive. But other tanks such as Blood Death Knight, for example, has been designed initially as, or at least over the last few expansions, intentionally been designed as more of like a solo player experience when it comes to your survivability, where other tanks play off of the healer, utilize defenses. Blood Death Knights are meant to take huge hits of damage and heal through it as long as they can manage their resources. It ends up feeling kind of like a too many chefs in the kitchen kind of moment with it. But let's go over some of the changes that we've seen for Blood Death Knight in particular, like a brand new Death Knight aura called Coagulated Blood. Every tank has got some sort of an aura of their own, but essentially for Blood Death Knights, Coagulated Blood shows you the amount of damage that you've taken recently, which is then used to calculate how much healing your Deathstrike can do, and the ability itself shows stacks, which equates to a percentage of how much more healing your Deathstrike is doing based on your current health. Which means your Deathstrike healing is actually being limited with this update. As a Death Knight, it's pretty normal for you to be able to take huge hits to the face and then try to heal them as soon as you can with a Deathstrike. But now that healing and the mechanic of Deathstrike healing is now being limited based on the damage, and they essentially are trying to have a bit more in-depth and detailed control of how often and how powerful Deathstrike healing is, in order to give more room for your healer to be able to supplement moments when you are in trouble and need actual healer healing. With this, we also see a ton of other nerfs for Blood DK in particular, such as your Blood Shield now has a cap of 50% of your maximum health. Normally, as you Deathstrike with your Mastery, which provides you a Blood Shield, that cap is no longer at 100% health. You can't have the entire, your entire health bar be covered with your own shield. Now, at most, you could have 50%, which for raids in particular, like tank swaps, you are going to start noticing that Blood DKs are going to be a bit squishier a little bit earlier. But from there on, we got a ton of other talent adjustments and changes in order to make Blood Death Knights essentially a little bit squishier, or to give healers a reason to be able to heal you, making you a little bit less self-reliant. Consumption for the Blood Plague damage speed up increase is being nerfed from 50% down to 30%, and the duration of this effect is also reduced from 8 seconds to 6 seconds. With the talent of Rapid Decomposition, the damage of Blood Plague in D&D, and the talent that speeds up the damage, now that speed up effect is being lowered from an 18% down to a 15% speed up. With the talent of Coagulopathy, it increases your Blood Plague damage, but this one has also been nerfed from a 30% increase to a 25% increase per stack. However, Bone Shield has been buffed by a little bit to give you, instead of 80% armor, now it's 100% armor. Though testing it out, you do still take quite a few hits as a Blood Death Knight. You're not all of a sudden going to start to feel super tanky. Talents such as Leech and Strike have had their healing reduced from a 0.5% down to 0.25%. Even the parry chance for your Dancing Rune weapon has been reduced from a 40% down to a 35%. And each Dancing Rune weapon now generates 3 runic power when mirrored from a Heart Strike instead of 5 runic power, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 2 swords that are generating you quite a bit of runic power, so you do notice the amount of resources you're able to generate, and you may even find yourself a little bit more starved than usual. With the talent of Blood Drinker, the damage reduction that it does against the target has been changed from a 20% reduction to a 15%, a slight adjustment, but one nonetheless. The ability of Bone Storm has been adjusted so it actually does function with a lot of other talents, so Bone Storm is a lot more of an acceptable ability now, and you may actually want to end up utilizing it, but that healing of Bone Storm has been reduced from 3% down to 2%, with a maximum of 50% reduced down to 10%, so even the healing of this one has got lowered. But the damage of Bone Storm has been buffed by 20%, which is quite noticeable, and like I said, the Bone Shield interactions are a little bit better than they were before, making this ability actually kind of more usable. But that being said, Blood Death Knight for the most part has gotten quite a few nerfs in terms of survivability, and these seems to have been a little bit too severe to the point where Blizzard is actually going back and refunding some of these nerfs. So everything that I mentioned here, some of those things are actually being unnerfed or being rolled back over on the beta. However, this list is ever evolving, and right now I can't really give you like an accurate list of all the abilities that have been rolled back, all of the nerfs that have been rolled back for the Blood Death Knight, but they are aware that the community reaction hasn't been great on this one at all, and they're now panicking a little and trying to bring it back to, okay, hold on, let's unnerf this ability, unnerf that ability, let's bring some more survivability back to the Blood Death Knight. And after being able to test it out for myself, as well as seeing some of the logs from today in particular of players trying to test this, yes, Blood Death Knights are a lot squishier. And a lot of other Blood Death Knights also reporting, like on things like Discord and class communities and such, that their survivability and spikiness of like how much damage they take as a Blood Death Knight, it is still pretty high. And the idea of this build was to adjust a lot of classes in terms of to give them more passive tankiness, to reduce a lot of the spikiness that they get to feel, and to smooth out the damage that you take as a tank. And they've actually seen some of these that have resulted in buffs, like for Brewmaster, a massive armor buff, massive stagger buff, and massive stagger buff for magic damage in particular, which helps smooth out Brewmaster to make it feel less squishy and closer to all the other tanks, which is a notable increase. And a lot of other tanks such as Bear, Druid, and Warrior already have this very smooth intake of playstyle where they can help reduce every single hit that they take, which of course you're going to see their health bar reduce, but the healer is able to better mitigate that kind of reduction together with a Druid, together with a Warrior. Like, they're designed to be built as a team sport. Blood Death Knight is still designed as a spec that's meant to take huge spiky damage, and they're trying to reduce how much spikiness you have, but it's still so natural and core to Death Knight for the last few expansions, which is how it's been designed. It's essentially been designed as a solo player mode. So now you have a class that's designed from the core to take huge spiky bits of damage, to have yourself panic as your health dips down super low, massive heal to help recover it, but now all that self-healing is not enough, and you're still taking spiky damage. Even in the Blue Post dimension, they don't want healers to deal with spiky damage intake at all. They don't want them to panic either. But the way that Death Knight has been designed is just not it would need to be, I think Blood Death Knight would need to go through like a holistic change to its core to be closer to that of a Bear Druid, to be closer to that of a prop Warrior, and that's probably not what people really want to play, because people play Blood Death Knight for that passionate survivability, the ability to just heal yourself the entire time, to sustain yourself through the worst of the worst with those powerful death strikes, and that's part of the fun of this class. But as it stands, there's not a lot of Blood Death Knights that are very excited about this change in particular. Like, the actual tank adjustment, some healers like the idea behind it, like the theory, the core of the message, and the core of what they want to do. Nobody really has a problem with it. It's just how they go about doing these kind of changes. And I think what they've done so far is maybe applied a bit of a too wide of a brush to kind of try to hit all those tanks all at once, because a lot of them have gotten hit by like massive sweeps of just like overall tank nerf all across the board. Though some tanks came out better than before, like Brewmaster monks are a lot better, and they're actually just fine. Warriors, Guardian Druids, they're perfectly fine with some of the changes they've seen, because they don't necessarily really change the playstyle at all. It's still a team sport, and basically all of the cooldowns are still essentially as strong as they were. That self-healing is a little worse, but the healer's more involved, which doesn't really change much for them. For Paladin in particular, those guys got hit pretty hard as well. And pretty early on, it looked like maybe lights out for Prop Pally in particular. Blood Death Knight Avenged Demon Hunter at the time of me seeing all this was on the TBD environment, but from what I've been able to see in the community is players are saying that Avenged Demon Hunters now have more healing than a Blood Death Knight, which previously was like the most healy of healy classes, which is probably not great. I think Blood Death Knight would need to go through some core changes, or instead, what I think is maybe they should do is allow Blood Death Knights to maintain their niche, because that's the class, and that's how it's been designed for the last few expansions. Unless they want to overhaul it and revamp it and really adjust it, then I think it would be just fine, but you would need to put in a lot of effort, and the pre-patch is coming out next week, in the expansion a month after. I guess the question is, would they even have enough time? But overall, this is a lot of changes that happened all at once. It's definitely going to be jarring for some of you. I would recommend for everybody to give Death Knights on PTR or on beta, if you have access to it, a go and give it a proper shot. This may be one of those things where my experience wasn't that great with it, and what I've been reading online hasn't been all that inspiring either. But maybe you will actually enjoy these type of changes and this adjustment, and maybe you'll find the challenge of, you know, having to struggle to survive as a Blood Death Knight more to your liking. But again, time will tell. Beta is still beta. There's a lot of changes yet to come. They started to roll back some of those DK nerfs, so maybe they'll end up rolling majority of them back to keep Death Knights a fairly viable and a powerful choice going forward. Though that being said, I do want to ask you guys in the comments down below, what are your thoughts on all of these changes? What do you think about the changes to Frost Death Knight, and would you actually consider now playing a bit of that Reaper Frost Death Knight? And also, what are your thoughts on these Blood Death Knight changes? Do you like the idea? Do you want to see this whole, I guess, design of theirs follow through? Would you want to see the final result? And do you agree that maybe you would want healers to be a little bit more involved in that whole tank healing process? Or do you prefer Death Knights to be the powerful, reliable, self-sustainable tank that it's been for multiple expansions now, and you would rather have them maintain this niche type of playstyle going forward? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But as always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very, very much appreciate that. And if you want to join our community or reach out to me directly in a DM, the channel Discord, which you can find over in the description of every single video, is there just for you. I would be very, very happy if you were to join our community Discord. As always, let me know your thoughts about this video in the comments down below, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.